from an M50, E34, M52, if it's S54, S52, all these SM engines from the 90s and 2000s, and the bolt pattern on this does not line up. I'm just not, it definitely doesn't line up. As you can tell, the lining of the actual gasketing material is completely off. The bolt pattern is different. It's wider, it's narrower, it's just different. So how can you adapt an M50 front sump oil pan onto the N54 chassis? Well, I have both bolt patterns here. And I have an idea on how I might be able to fit the M50 oil pan onto the M54, and if it works, that is a viable solution for swapping the E30, the N54 into the E30 with bolt-ons only. And that means I need to make my engine arms and my transmission mount. Because once I do that, then I can take the subframe down and I can sit the engine up on jack stands and I can start mounting, I can take the subframe out and then I can start making my mounts where they need to be and then work on getting the oil pan in without the subframe, steering rack, and all that other stuff. All right, guys, now while we start working on the oil pan adapter bracket idea, which is what I had, which is basically a 20 millimeter thick oil pan adapter bracket that bolts onto the N54 block, but also allows the M50 pan to be bolted on from underneath, allowing the front sump oil pan to be used. Now, the oil pan bolt patterns are very different, so you have to make sure that you don't have any overlap. The overall perimeter or outside circumference of both of the pans are different as well. As you overlaid both of those oil pan gaskets on top of each other, there were differences. So I'm working on a design to try to get a actual bracket installed onto the N54 block that allows the M50 pan to be used. Now, yes, the oil pan will now prevent the engine will be sitting higher. So everything else as a result of that, because I don't want any hood clearance issues, will need to be pushed lower. Now on the M60 and M62, S62 V8 E30 swaps, the solution there to keep the driveline aligned was to use either 10 or 20 millimeter spacers between the subframe and the chassis, and that actually worked. I have that on my E30 S62 as well. It does change the suspension geometry just a tiny bit, but not enough for 99.999% of enthusiasts to really notice. So that is the solution that I'm looking to have implemented here, in terms of oil pan fitment. Now the engine brackets will be custom, the transmission bracket will be custom, and the driveline will be a shortened front half welded to the E30 rear. So we're gonna end up going through that in the next couple of episodes, but today what we're going to be doing is removing this engine. We're gonna be identifying the clearance issues that we need to make, the provisions that we need to make onto the actual chassis, and we're gonna start disassembling the N54 engine and start working on some of those stock fixes for the common failures on the N54 and get this thing up and running before we put it in for a second time. So let's take a look. Now, looking at the passenger side interferences, there's clearly an interference with the charge pipe. This charge pipe is hitting the side rail right here, and you can see a very clear issue that's emerging here with the charge pipe entrance to the frame rail. So we need to figure out what we're gonna do there. I don't know if I wanna make any modifications to the frame rail, although I do feel like that it's inevitable to make modifications there. Definitely not making modifications here. I might just raise the engine just a tiny bit and shift it over just enough to get that room that I need. The rear does not have too many interferences. I mean, obvious interference with the sidewall there, the firewall. So I got to make provisions for that. If I have to bang that back just a tiny bit, I will. Usually that's pretty common in the E30 swap world. I've done that a number of times on my other swaps. But the front clearance is going to be an issue as well. I'm obviously going to be using an aftermarket radiator and an aftermarket puller fan, probably on the front side, in order to effectively cool this thing. So what we have here is some marked locations on the block of where I would like to make the bracket. You can see right down there that this right here is the actual mount location on the E30 chassis. then I want to tap into a certain number of holes on the block, either there and there, or there's another one right down there. I'm thinking those bottom, I'm thinking this one, that one, and then the one right above it. I don't know if I want to use those other two over there. We'll see. But this is what my plan is for mounting the driver's side mount. The passenger side is a little bit more difficult and a whole nother story. So let's talk about that. Okay, now the passenger side is going to be a little bit more difficult. You can see that the E30 mount is right here. Okay, and the points that I've identified to make the bracket are the 4 ones that are in pink. I put pink stickers over them to identify that those are the ones I'd like to make the bracket on. And I need to make sure that I get the downpipes installed so that I know exactly what my path is going to be from the bracket right here to this mount. So I'm going to have to basically do a big from to. Now the engine is going to get raised a little bit more, which is going to give me a little bit more room to make this swooping bracket come back up. I'm not going to be modifying the subframe if I can help it. I really do not want to touch the subframe. I want this to be brackets that could be plug and play for anybody to use. So I want to develop these guys for you guys. So as you can see here, these are the 4 holes I really would like to tap into for this bracket that mounts onto the block, so I can do that. And then I will see exactly where that's going to match onto the E30 subframe, and all the while eliminating the need for any type of interference with the exhaust manifold. So hopefully this will work out. Let's see. Let's take the engine out and take a look. All right, now that we got the engine out, we've got our brackets marked, we need to not only clean up the engine bay and get that set up, we need to remove the entire front end of the car, including the fenders, and just basically expose the entire front end of the car so that when we do make our modifications, we won't have to worry about ruining anything or breaking anything in the process, because everything will already have been removed. Same thing for the engine. We're going to end up putting this engine in and out a number of times in order to get the fitment correct. So having said that, and we need to do a lot of maintenance activities on this thing, I wanted to basically strip most of the engine free from things like the harness and the accessories, the turbos. I want to take a lot of that stuff off so that I can easily bring the engine in and out multiple times in order to set it in its final position, because that really is the ultimate next step of this swap, is to get the engine sitting in its position, because after that's done, everything else kind of just falls into place and you just work around it. Now, like I said, I don't want to do anything with the E30 subframe. I want to use these stock locations for mounting. And the transmission bracket, that's going to be custom, no doubt about it. I might actually end up using the factory one and then welding off of that. That's probably the easiest thing to do. But as far as the engine and the car goes, I really want to just get it sitting in its position. Oil pan is going to be complicated. We need to talk about how we're going to have an oil pan solution. I talked a little bit earlier about the M50 oil pan with the adapter bracket that we're looking to design, but that might not work. Okay, it might not work. It might not bolt onto the transmission. We might not want it to bolt onto the transmission. Maybe that's too complicated. Maybe we'll just keep it bolted to the engine only. We need to design another pickup for it. So there are things that we need to think about as we're going through this design to make it as bolt-on as possible, but still make it unique and something that stands out in the crowd. That's kind of what we're looking to do with this car here. So. Overall, good progress today so far. Let's start taking off this front end, let's start stripping the engine, and let's start taking care of the engine bay. Here is the entire harness unscathed, No breaks in any of the connectors. Everything looks good. Just a high level as we're going through. This is basically the underside of the intake manifold. This is where the knock sensors go. The other sensors for the air map temperature sensors for the intake. We have our oxygen sensors there. We have a reverse wire switch over there. We have these are actually our oxygen sensors. Sorry about that. This here is our oil level sensor. We have our blah 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 blah. These guys are this is for the alternator and the compressor. Goes across here to where the DME wires into for powers. This is the interface to the rest of the car through the X60551. And we have our injectors. We have our boost solenoids going all the way over here to our oil, our crank sensor, position sensors. We have our oil pressure sensor over here. This is all the coolant pump stuff. This stuff is coolant pump, coolant map thermostat sensor, and some of the other temperature sensors down below. So yeah, I mean, everything seems to be in line here. It should be pretty simple putting this thing back together, but I wanted it off. I want everything basically to be sitting where it needs to be, so I can take a look at it as a separate entity. Not really going to do anything with this here, just using it as a learning experience. All right, looking at the crankcase seal, the front main seal. Doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's hard to tell unless you really get in there. Let me shine some light on it. It's kind of hard to tell. But overall, it doesn't look that bad. I know that belt has gotten sucked in, and I want to remove the valve cover, so let's do that next. I want to see how bad this belt issue is all throughout the rest of the inside of the engine. So, I mean, it's a little dirty. Obviously, this needs to be cleaned up. But, you know, there is some stuff in here that kind of does get me a little bit nervous. Overall, it doesn't look so bad. Gotta give it a good, thorough inspection. This does have a lot of miles on it. It's got about 125,000 on it. So I knew that there would be a lot of maintenance work. I just want to make sure, I really hope that this engine is good. And basically what I'm seeing here is that there are a lot of things here, but if you just do all the maintenance activities that I'm going to do on this, on an N54, it really should fire up and work just like new. All the gaskets, all the, you know, cooling pump, all that stuff that we need to do. If we do it on this, then I think it should behave and act like almost a brand new engine. So let's keep on moving forward with that mentality. It does have index 12 injectors, which is excellent. So we know that that's already good. But you know, we just want to make sure that everything's good. So let's give this a good thorough inspection and you know, move forward from there. All right, I set the engine down on blocks, and now I can remove the intake manifold because I want to take a look inside of the intakes to see what the valves look like on the underside, to see if we need to do another intake valve blasting. In which case, if I do, I will do a much better job than the first time I did it on the E36 M30. I took a lot of notes and learned some lessons on how to do it better with the right tools, and we'll do that. So let's take a look at this first to see if we really do need to do any intake manifold blasting, and then make the assessment then. That's done. Let's take a look and see if we can get some good shots of the... I don't think we're going to be able to get some good shots. Although, I mean, you can kind of see it. It really does not look that bad. I wouldn't probably recommend doing it. However, I did notice that this cylinder 5 is... Let's see if I can get a better view. There we go. There we go. You can kind of see that, right? Cylinder 5 is in bad shape. Cylinder 6 is in also pretty bad shape. I would assume that if a valve blast was done on this engine, then it was probably done on the first 4 cylinders, because the The last two are the hardest to get to, so I would not put it past them to only do those cylinders. But it seems like it's easy enough to do. I would like to do it. I want to advocate to my customer that this is something that he probably should do, and I'd offer to do it as a service. But anyway, we'll see. I've got most of the engine basically torn down. I'm keeping the accessories on just for clearance sake. But I do want to get this thing back in. It'll be a lot easier now that most of everything has been removed and stripped. And I also kept the turbos on. I'm not going to do anything with the turbos right now. The plan right now is to rebuild the turbos. We want to basically fix the wastegate rattle issue by getting an ECS kit to re-weld them onto the wastegates and make sure that we remove the rattle. We're going to rebuild all the seals on them and everything, and so make sure they don't leak. So that's a pretty easy update to make while everything is already out. We're going to replace the coolant pump and the thermostat and all that other good stuff down there. Looks like there was no upper bolt for that. Apparently those are very difficult to get to, so we got to replace that bolt as well. And we're going to do the main crank seal. We're going to do the accessory belts. We're going to do the oil filter housing gasket, valve cover gasket, new spark plugs. We're going to use the Index 12 injectors. I don't know if we're going to do anything here to the drive line, like clutch or anything like that. It depends on what my guy wants to do here, and we're certainly going to clean all this up. This is pretty gross. All this is pretty gross. But while everything is out, we're going to be able to make our brackets to install here as well. That'll be pretty easy to do. So now let's take a look at the front end of that guy and get that apart.